Hi. Before we get started, I want to talk to you a little bit about me. I'm a Montessori parent and educator, trained and experienced at all levels, but I've spent most of my life educating elementary students. I have Thompson-Willingham language training, and I'm passionate about literacy. I also have a special interest in learning differences and assessment. So I hope today you walk away informed and inspired, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks. Hello, I'm Tricia Willingham, and I'm here today to talk to you about supplementary support for reading comprehension. When we think about reading, we think about three areas of skill development. There's the knowing how to read, knowing the sounds of the letters, decoding the letters, becoming fluent, the actual process of reading. There's also the understanding of the words and the meanings that are put on the page in front of you. And then the third thing is the motivation to read, the why we read, to instill in children an understanding of the value of reading as a vehicle to learn and a love of reading. Well, today we're going to talk about number two. So the number two was, as you remember, understanding what the words mean that are on the page. The comprehension, shall we say. So it turns out that this cognitive process of reading comprehension is actually quite difficult to understand. It's complicated. And so I was thinking that, that I would bring an expert in to talk about that. Dan, are you here?
Hi, everybody. When psychologists think about reading comprehension, they tend to think in terms of levels, three different levels at which comprehension happens. The most straightforward is the level of individual words. Kids need to know the vocabulary in what they're reading in order to comprehend. The second level, again, fairly straightforward and intuitive, is kids need to be able to unravel the grammar. So you've got all these words, they're going to be assembled into sentences. Kids need to be able to work out the syntax of the sentence in order to assign meaning. If you just had a bucket of words, then there would be no difference between Dan bit the dog versus the dog bit Dan. Right? So both of those are fairly intuitive. There's another level, which is building meaning across sentences, that's a little bit less intuitive. So for example, consider reading the sentence, "He smiled." You would think of one meaning to that sentence in this context. The little boy hugged the new puppy that he got for his birthday. He smiled. Versus the notorious gangster saw the informant in the crowd and pulled out his gun. He smiled. Right? You ought to be thinking about different meanings for the word "he smiled" in those two instances, different reasons that the person doing the smiling actually smiled, right? So that's the third level, where we're building meaning across sentences. Now, the other thing that psychologists would emphasize in reading comprehension is the mental processes that underlie reading comprehension. The main engine, the main mental processes that you use in reading comprehension are actually exactly the same ones that you use in listening comprehension. When you think about it, it almost has to be that way. Once you go from print on the page to words in the mind, it wouldn't make sense for there to be a whole completely separate set of language processes that work out meaning for language that you hear versus language that you read. So your brain is much more efficient than that. Your brain uses the same processes for reading comprehension that it uses for listening comprehension. So one implication to draw from that is that anything that can be done to improve listening comprehension is also going to improve reading comprehension. The second thing a psychologist would emphasize in this context is, yeah, there's a lot of overlap between listening comprehension and reading comprehension, but it's not perfect overlap. And part of the reason for that is that people write differently than they speak. and we go back to those three different levels, that generalization applies at all three levels. So in terms of vocabulary, writers tend to use more unusual words than speakers do. In terms of sentence level, writers tend to use more complex syntax than speakers do. And finally, in terms of making meaning across sentences, writers also tend to use more complicated organizations. When I'm speaking, I tend to keep things pretty linear. I sort of tell stories where A causes B and then B causes C. But when writers are writing, depending on the genre, the organization may be quite different than that.
Thanks, Dan. So my take on what he just said kind of looks like this. I got 5 main points out of it. That comprehension is the understanding of the meanings of the words. That it also is understanding the ideas in a sentence. Oh, that it's coordinating the meaning across sentences. I learned that verbal understanding parallels reading comprehension. So if you're learning about things through spoken language, that knowledge builds the same way for reading comprehension. And then the last thing I took from that was that organizing the information is key. So that makes sense. So now I want you to stop this video for like 5 minutes, and I want you to do something. I want you to write down all the things that you can think of that we do at school for reading comprehension. So you can pull from your experiences at school, any trainings that you have had or professional experience. You can use your creativity, of course, and yeah, and any other experiences that you may think are conventional that you want to write down. So go ahead, I'll be right here. Hi, welcome back. Okay, so thanks for doing that. While you did that, I did that too. And so here's my kind of list. I came up with a bunch of things. Most of these are from when I taught upper elementary or me going to school myself. Don't actually remember any reading comprehension work that was done before I was a skilled reader, which I don't know when that happened, about second or grade or so. And so I don't really have, none of these things would really be done then. But the truth is, this talk is not about these conventional things, right? We're talking today about supplemental things. So, well, let's keep going. So what are some other ideas? Well, one thing that might help you sort of open your mind to outside of the box is, remember that I said that my memories were mostly in upper elementary or the higher grades. Well, that's because by then I was a skilled reader. But you guys work with kids all the way from 1st grade through 6th grade. So some of those kids are not going to be skilled readers, and we're not waiting, right? So, but it does bring up in my head a common misconception. The common misconception is that reading comprehension happens only after a child is reading. But this is not true, right? We learned from Dan that reading comprehension in reading parallels sort of spoken language comprehension. So why wait, right? And lots of you lower L teachers or people who work with 6, 7, and 8-year-olds outside of the classroom You know that these kids are not quite ready to dive deep into themes and genres and complicated plots yet, right? So, well, what are we going to do? No, they're not ready. And the reason is, as elementary educators, you get to straddle that very complicated time of the reading learning curve, right? So you sometimes your kids, when you first get them, they don't even know their sounds. And yet some of your kids, even in lower elementary, can be found snuggled up with a chapter book that they can't put down in the corner. So there is such a wide range of skills that you need to work with. This job is not easy. It's complicated, right? So, but that doesn't mean that we can't do it. It puts us in a bit of a pickle. Well, may I suggest we're going to use the same concepts, but we're going to use them at different complexities based on where the child is. We're going to have children collaborate with each other and pull from each other's skills so that collectively they're working towards something, and a broader knowledge base can be activated. We're going to work on verbal comprehension. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to create a culture of interest around words and language and books. And I get excited right here. You may or may not have heard the term love of words. That's what I'm talking about. We're going to create sort of an attraction, a magnetic pull towards words and language. And that is going to support reading comprehension. So there are opportunities everywhere. And I say this because there's a reason why the people in this room are not just the lower and upper elementary teachers. There are opportunities on the playground. There are opportunities in the lunchroom, in the hallway, at the water fountain. Reading comprehension support can happen anywhere. And I don't want those opportunities to just go by. They just keep going by. We're missing, something that we could have done to elevate the experience for these children. And so I want to advise that you should approach all of this with curiosity and questioning, and not in a drilling kind of sort of naggy way, or in a friendly, thoughtful person to another thoughtful person conversation way. I want to also advise that modeling is such a powerful tool. You get interested, you show interest, you figure out what's sort of the thing that you like about it, and then you share that with the children. Okay, so we've got the opportunities, but then there are some principles that you should keep in mind and try to remember. Broad background knowledge is really important. And so the more seeds that you can plant and the more exposure children can have to different topics and experiences, the more rich, maybe not life, but more rich a knowledge base they're going to have. And that's going to help them when they're reading all different topics from all different places and in all different times. This reading comprehension work is not a language subject only. This should be weaved within geography and geometry and phys ed and ecology and music and lunchtime. I can't emphasize enough how important it is that language isn't just in language, right? There is language in everything. And that's the key to this work. This work should be done in parallel to reading skills, as we've sort of talked about before. There is no reason to wait. You would do it in parallel. The reading skills get worked on just as the motivation gets worked on at the same time. Okay, so guess what time it is? It's time to stop again. I just inspired you, didn't I? So now I want you to use that information. You've opened up your mind to thinking beyond the classroom, to using verbal language, not just the written word, and to use modeling and energy as a tool. What other ways to support reading comprehension can you come up with? Take 5 minutes right now and write some things down. Okay, I'll be right here doing the same thing. All right, so supplementary reading comprehension support. That's what we're talking about here today. And so I did the list too while you were doing it. And these are the things that I came up with. Conversations, choices. Okay, conversations is pretty obvious, I think. Talking, it's where love of words comes in. It's about talking about things and putting things back on someone. By when you're asked a question, you ask one back. Choices is about, in Montessori, we're so big on giving children choices. There's power in that. There's also power in the fact that sometimes we don't give children choices and we get to sort of prescribe what happens. So when you have a choice as a teacher or as a I don't know, a hallway monitor, it doesn't matter. When you have a choice, that's a powerful thing. And so use that choice for the good. It's an opportunity. The next one I came up with was story time, just some different things to think about when you're doing a read aloud. And then, reference book lessons. Like, have you ever considered, reference books are tools, right? Tools need explicit instruction, in my mind. And then, let's see. I would be remiss if I didn't say Montessori materials. Not going to spend a lot of time there, but there is something that I want to talk about. Okay, so that's my list of supplemental reading comprehension support tools. So let's get into that. As we do, let's remind ourselves about what our goal is here. What skills are involved in reading comprehension? We got this from Dan. We got understanding the meanings of words, understanding the ideas in a sentence, coordinating the ideas across sentences or meaning across sentences, and then organizing the information. Okay. Conversations. So I touched on this a little bit already, that I always use curiosity and sort of as a discussion. You often will have kids come to you and say, how do you spell potato? And my first answer is always, well, how do you think? What do you think? Because there is value in them searching within their head to try to find something. And so then they work through it. And so maybe they say Potato. And I don't do this. I'm not a no girl. I'm a yes. Well, listen, you are so close. That does say potato. And I know that end TOE is like the toe on your foot, right? So that might be why you do it. I often think of spelling it that way too, but there's actually no E on potato, right? So right there, that's just sort of how I approach it. Now, if that child spelled that potato right, and sometimes you will get a child who asks you, but then knows how to spell it anyway. That's just insecurity, right? We need to build confidence in that guy. But then it's somewhat the same. I have the same sort of reaction, like, you got it. Yep. Right? This is all the same. So anyway, I don't know why I was going on about that. The other thing I often do when children ask me things like just something that they just learned, and then they go, oh, what's that called again? well, they're not slowing down and stopping and thinking and trying to figure out what it is. And so my job in that case, I think, is to sort of put them back in the situation where they were using that. So I try and make them recall. Well, do you remember when we just had that lesson with the yellow material? And you had remember we have the baseline. What's another way to call that? Right, length. So therefore, the other one is sometimes bringing information around it will have them pull it. And now all of a sudden you just reviewed length, width, and base and area. And so, there is value in that. That was repetition. Anyway, sorry, I digress. I tend to do that. Let's keep going. In conversations, it's a great time to bring in that love of words. So what's another word for that? What's another word we could use instead of that one? Or I kind of bring this conversation into story time too, but I'll talk about it here. So if it's a conversation about words when you're reading a story or telling a story or reading a book to someone. So there's a word and you think it might be a little bit difficult. So you say, who knows that word? Oh, Joey does, but Samira does not know that word. And so you say, Joey, can you think of another word that means that same word? Get Joey to try to explain. And then all of a sudden Samira catches on because Joey's taught her that. And then, so it's about talking about these things. It's about bringing attention to the interestingness of stuff. So love of words involves synonyms and word families and prefixes and suffixes and contractions and all of those interesting sort of details around language. Prefixes and suffixes and word families are really valuable for when you're reading a word and you've never seen that word before. You don't know what that word means, but you see that it has port in it. Airport, that a port means to carry, right? So portable. Oh, that must mean something about carrying too. So there's value in studying words in that way because that first one about the knowledge of words. Let's see. Model thought processes. Thought process. Oh, I know what this is. This is where you show that you don't know everything as an adult. You actually are still learning. And when you need to know something, you kind of model how to figure out how to learn it. So I often, when I'm reading a book to kids, I have a dictionary right there so that I can look it up. I model how to use that. It's not just about, using tools like that. It's just about talking through the process of thinking. Oh, I was thinking of this, but then I remembered that we used it over there. So then I went to find it over there. And then I thought, and then it wasn't there. So then I thought, oh, you know what? Then I remember seeing someone with it over there. So then I went and got it over there. Talk through those processes, those problem solving processes that you take as an adult and we take for granted. They need to be learned by children. And the best way for us to show them how to do those are by modeling. Okay. Using specific terms in a situation. So this is like, say you're a PE teacher and you are teaching basketball. I should have picked one that I actually know. I don't know that much about basketball, but there is special vocabulary in everything that we do. People who are bird watchers have special vocabulary that they use, and people who are landscapers have special vocabulary that they use, and people who collect stamps have special vocabulary that they use, and I can't pronounce any of it. But the point is that particular vocabulary enrichment can be brought in to stories that you tell, to conversations and discussions that you have. And when you use a word and you think that's a hard one. Don't not use it. Use it, and then have a discussion about that word with this child when they're getting off the bus and you're shaking their hand, good morning. Don't be afraid to use those big words. Just follow it up with direct instruction about what that word means, and you'll be enriching. You will be enriching. All right. Repetition of terms. My point there is, after you do that with them, use those words with them. Use them. It's a way not only to enrich their vocabulary, it's a way to connect with them. You have a little secret together, right? Like you told me what that was yesterday. That's a special moment for them. Okay. Those are my ideas about conversations. Oh, well, there's one more, build background knowledge, but we already kind of covered that. So let's go on to choices. Okay, so I kind of talked about how there's power in your choices. And I think you might have got a little bit more when I was just talking about conversations, because those stories about being a stamp collector and using those words are valuable. It's obvious that anyone who's reading a book to a child is going to pick different authors and different ethnicities and styles and topics and genres, right? I don't need to remind you of those things, I don't think. But if you're the PE teacher, make sure that you're not just playing basketball all the time. Make sure you're giving them a wide variety of experiences and the language that goes with it, and that there's comfort in the same. So it's really hard when you're you're a lower L teacher and these children love mice. You're going to find every book about mice, right, and keep going. But I want to challenge you a little bit. I have done that for sure. But if the topic of mice is going to stay the same, then I would challenge you to make all of the other things change. Use the opportunities to give a diverse foundation of knowledge. All right, let's see. Oh, and the other thing, I don't know. This is a little bit about weaving, but if you're the PE teacher and you're doing boomerangs, talk about the history of boomerangs. Like make that a part of what you're doing. That's an opportunity missed if you don't talk about the fact that soccer is called football in England. All of those little sort of interesting pieces of information provide background knowledge that they're going to use when they're reading books. Okay. Look at me. I forgot to, this is all the things I said. Books, sports, countries, songs. Okay. Now it's time for us to go on to story time with books or stories. So reading aloud with students may be an obvious way to build a love of books and motivation, but it's also a way of building understanding. Some pre-literature study discussions can happen when you're having a book. So that means, like, in upper elementary, you do lit groups and things like that, and you figure out who are the characters and what's the plot and where's it set and what are the themes going through it and all of that. Well, the sort of baseline of that is to sort of talk about a story after you read it. It's a storybook with a little guy in a snowsuit, right? But you can say, who's the person in this book, or who's the fox in this book? I don't know. And you can sort of build the idea of, in a book, there's a who, there's a what, there's a why, there's a how and a when and pull details from them, because and not in a drilling way, but sort of a, like, maybe it's a challenge. Maybe it's like, I wonder who can think of one food that caterpillar ate. Who can think of another one? Right? Recall. Start to do things like that. This one sometimes is done. I'm not sure. When I was a kid, which is a million years ago, I think maybe they said, "Did you like that book?" And that was probably about all. When I say reaction to story time, I'm thinking, did you like that? But then did it make you feel excited? Did it make you feel sort of sleepy? Did sleepy is a good feeling. I like sleepy. You know what I mean? Like, take that a little bit further, because that will grow into opinion. So this is things that you would use at upper elementary too. So like, they're so into like starting to have their own opinion about things. Is like, did you like that? One will say yes, and one will say absolutely not. It was the most terrible book I've ever read. Those things, although in the moment don't feel that great, what you're doing is building a voice for those children. And so those things are important. When it comes down to now write a 4-page essay on that book, it's good that they have passion about what has been read, right? There's the who, what, when, where, why, how. And then one thing that you can do is you can say, all right, let's back up. If you were to tell me about this book, what would you say? Give me one sentence. You could challenge that. Okay, now tell me in 2 sentences. I don't know. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, use the book as not just an impression and then leave it sit there and ferment. Like, you can use it as a reading comprehension experience. I often do this. What's another way to say that? Jimmy played in the snow. Jimmy rolled around in the white stuff that fell from the sky. I mean, you could get silly. This could go on for hours, as far as I'm concerned. The only limitation is creativity, right? So opportunities. These are opportunities I want to tell you about. I like to do this because it's kind of like what I said about having them have modeling thought processes. So sometimes if I'm reading a chapter book, what I'll do is I'll say, okay, where are we? We're on this page. Okay, so let me think. What happened so far? And so I'll start at first if they're not good, but they are so quick to be like, oh, da-da-da-da-da, and a-da-da, and this, and this, and this, and this. And the fact that they're going in their head and they're bringing up all of the things that happened, and other children are seeing them go in their head and bringing up all of the things that happened. And all of those kids are remembering, oh yeah, that happened. Oh, and then that will bring up other ideas of things that happened, right? This is thorough thinking through, right? We value that, don't we? I certainly do. Okay. This is something that I don't know how often it happens, especially if you're just reading a storybook or something. And maybe a storybook, it's not complicated enough, but in a chapter book, it certainly can be. Sometimes it's complicated about what's happening. And so I will actually go to the whiteboard and draw it out. And I don't necessarily, sometimes it's a picture. And by the way, if you're not a great artist and you're drawing in front of the kids, I love that. And I do it all the time. And I always say, well, I'm going to get better at it. I know that it's kind of hard to tell that that's a dog right there. But you know what? I did it. And next time I do it, I might do it better because I just did that. Anyway, so it's sort of like a picture and arrows, and maybe the dog arrow to the house. And then the dog went to the store, and then the dog went, you know what I mean? So that kind of mapping out of something, it brings a new experience, and it's kind of a little bit different. And so it's something good to try. Okay, so reference books, we're at reference books. this is often skimmed over, but I think it's an essential learning process. So reference books are tools, right? And just like a hammer, you've seen your dad use a hammer, so you kind of know that if you go like this on a nail, sorry, you couldn't see, I was at a camera, on a nail in the wall, it's going to push the hammer in. But I am pretty sure that it took me a long time to figure out that those two teeth on the end of that hammer were for pulling nails out of the wall that you couldn't get out with your fingers, right? And nobody had the sense, nobody thought to tell me, but it really would have been good to know. So I guess what I'm saying is, if we use that as an analogy, we have lots of books around us, dictionaries, thesauruses, recipe books, encyclopedias, textbooks, you can read them, but poetry books, nonfiction resources. We have all of these resources around us in our classrooms, in the library, wherever, that are there as resources. And we sometimes just expect kids to know how to do it without explicit instruction, and it doesn't work. A tool is only as good as you know how, if you know how it works. And so I would ask that every book that you have like that you go through and you explain, and not just once, but then give practice, like try and find, Africa in that atlas. And how do you look? Well, guess what? There's a table of contents at the beginning in this kind of atlas. In this kind of atlas, there's an index at the back. And you know what? Oh, what's that? All those words. That's a glossary. That's where you find the meanings of words. That it's like a mini dictionary that you don't really know the words to, because they're very specific, right? This is something that you should do. You should show them how to read a recipe. So there's the ingredients, right? Even a textbook or here's a book on airplanes, right? Do they know how the table of contents works? Do they know to go to that page? Do they know once they get to that page that the title, usually it starts big and then gets smaller and smaller in the information? And so sometimes the skill of just being able to find information in a book like that, the specific information that they need, that requires work. And so that requires instruction. So, okay, let's see. Those are things I just sort of touched on. So let's go to the next one. And now we're going to talk about Montessori materials. And the thing about Montessori materials is I'm not really going to get in there. I think I tried to brainstorm and think, okay, let's think in the Montessori materials, which ones work on reading comprehension? And there's lots, and this is not an exhaustive list. It's just sort of a list I started to think about. And so, what did I want to say? One thing I also thought that we do in Montessori, first of all, there is so much reading comprehension in a Montessori classroom. It's built right into the materials. Thank you, Maria. But there's also just in the lessons that we do in something that I didn't put down here, but I was thinking, like, even to the point where at the end, after we do a multiplication problem on the checkerboard, we recapitulate, right? And I love that word anyway, but I always say to the kids, let's recapitulate. And then that means that we say, okay, we took 355 and we multiplied it by 62. And the product we got was 22,010. And so even just the process of that is an organization of mind, right? It's a this is what we did. We recalled, we put it there. We got reading number practice while we did that. And we said what our answer was. And this is our answer. So I am in awe of the Montessori materials, as probably some of you, or hopefully most of you are. When I was going through the Montessori materials, there was a thing that came up for me. I looked back at that list, that that I kind of took from Dan's talk, and I thought, where are we coordinating ideas across sentences? What work does that? And I don't think, well, first of all, I'm not sure that I totally understand that to the depth that I should. And then the other thing was, I didn't know where that was covered. And so, well, I know that this is difficult for kids, and I really want to make sure that we're doing all that we can do, right? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to call Dan back, and I'm going to ask him to explain that part again a little bit more. Okay. So I'll be right back.
Hi, and welcome back. So I'm going to say just a little bit more about this idea of building bridges across sentences and its importance to comprehension. Let me start with an example, 2 sentences. Trisha spilled her coffee. Dan jumped up to get a rag. Okay, there are a couple things I want you to notice about this pair of sentences. First is that in terms of building bridges, the bridge that you are to build is a causal connection. You're meant to understand not simply that Trisha spilled her coffee and that also Dan got up to get a rag. You're meant to understand Dan jumped up to get a rag because Trisha spilled her coffee. It's not stated, but clearly that's what you're supposed to understand, is this causal connection. The second thing I want to point out is that not only did the writer omit the word because and just not give you any clue that you were supposed to draw this causal connection, but there was other information that is really needed to make that causal connection that's also omitted. The writer didn't include that either. So for example, you need to know that spilled coffee makes a mess, that in general people don't like messes, and that third, a rag can clean a mess. Right? So why is the writer omitting all of this information? Well, this is actually very common. It's common not only when you're writing, but also when you're speaking. You omit information that you figure your audience already has in mind, things that they already know. And the reason you do that is that if you spelled everything out very laboriously, speech would take a really long time, writing would take a really long time, and it would also be really boring. So if you said, Trisha spilled her coffee, that made a mess on the floor. Trisha and Dan don't like messes. Dan knew that there were rags under, right? So like sort of belaboring everything is unnecessary. If you know that your audience already has all these facts, then you can just sort of cut to the chase and say, Trisha spilled her coffee, and then go straight to Dan jumped up to get a rag. Now, the interesting thing about this omission of information is that when we're speaking, and again, speaking and writing are the same in this respect, when we're speaking or writing, we take a guess about what our audience knows. And that means we speak differently to different people. So you can imagine if you're at work and you're typing away on your computer, and a 3-year-old came in and said, what are you doing? It would be perfectly normal for you to say, I'm typing on a computer. If an adult came in and said, what are you doing? It would be weird to say, I'm typing on a computer, right? Exactly because we assume that an adult can see and they know what it is that you're doing. So we're constantly adjusting the way we speak depending on our audience, and that's what writers are doing too. Now, there's an extra wrinkle when we go from speaking to writing, because if you're speaking to someone and they guess wrong, they think you have more information than you actually do, it's easy to correct their misunderstanding. So everyone's got at least one friend like this who, when you ask them, hey, how's work going? And they are a chemist, say, they start talking to you as if you're a chemist. And they're just way overestimating your knowledge, what you know, right? They're talking as if they're talking to a fellow chemist, and that's just not going to work. So you can say, listen, you need to explain this stuff to me like I'm 5, because I don't understand what you're saying at all. But when you're reading, you don't have that opportunity. So writers are doing just the same thing. We've all heard important principle of writing is know your audience. This is a crucial aspect of knowing your audience. You have to know what your audience knows so that you can safely to know what you can safely omit. Do I need to explain that rags clean a mess or not? Or if I'm writing about chemistry, do I need to explain elementary chemistry or not? So writers are making a guess about what their readers know, and then they're going to omit information on that basis. If you've picked up a text where you don't know the stuff that the author knew, you don't have the opportunity to say to the author, well, you need to slow down. You need to explain this to me like I'm 5. So in that case, what's going to happen? You are not going to understand very much of what you're reading, and you're pretty likely to drop that text and stop reading it. All right, back to Tricia.
Wow, thanks. That made it a little bit clearer. Okay, so this is what I got from that. Coordinating meaning across sentences, that sometimes information is left out, and that how good you are at filling it in depends on your knowledge base, which, okay, we're working on that, and that it's difficult to learn and teach. So not totally helpful, but just because it's difficult, actually, when it's difficult, that's when it's really worth doing, isn't it? So now I have an idea. Some of you may know a material in the elementary classroom called the interpretive reading cards. Let me explain them and how to use them to those of you who aren't trained. But so they're pretty simple. They're just a sort of written sort of passage, or could be just a sentence. Actually, they start at sentences and then get a little bit more complicated. But they basically, a child reads it in their head and then they act it out. And the idea, it's definitely reading comprehension in general, but it's more of sort of like practice with reading comprehension. And the truth is, I think they're underused. I underuse them for sure. And I don't see them around very often. And if you use them, bless you, but I think they're underused. And I had this idea that they would be a great platform for coordinating the meaning across sentences. I have an example of one in case my description was not very clear. So I've got a card. It says, the child rose from her seat and with her face buried in her handkerchief, walked slowly, sadly toward the window. So if you can just picture it, you've got, second or third grader, maybe fourth grader, fifth grader, but they basically act this out. And the joy obviously is in the acting, but it's also in the, this is a secret. And here I've shown you the secret. And then usually, a discussion ensues of where you walk to the window and they'll get part of it. And then, you can show the card or read the card out or whatever, but it's either done as an individual or in pairs or in small groups or something like that. Okay, so let's stop. We're going to try. Let's each of us take 5 minutes to write an interpretive reading card that gives students practice with this comprehension skill. The more dramatic, I think, the better. And the difference about these is that you're going to try to write one that has something that a child has to infer in the middle. So they have to add an action in the middle in order for it to make sense. Okay, so go ahead and I'll try to do it too. Thanks. All right, this is what I came up with. 2 simple ones, not very deep, but hopefully from this you can it makes you get what I was talking about. So Shanna went to the water fountain, and as she walked away, she wiped her chin. So obviously there's a part that you would do, right? She's wiping her chin. Why do you think she's wiping her chin? Because she drank from the water fountain. Okay, so that's a cool thing, that the kid would have to actually drink from the water fountain, right? Or else something's missing. Amara went to the pet store looking for a puppy. When she left, she was sad. So I can think of a bunch of different ones here. So that's where this kind of one has choices. Why is she sad? Because there were no puppies? Is she sad because the door was locked? Is she sad because her mom said, no, you don't get a puppy? I don't know. But you get the idea. This does not only belong in the classroom. This could be a game in aftercare, or I don't know, recess. I don't know. But I want to leave that with you and give you a place to continue to sort of work on this topic. I want to send you on back to your school life with a challenge. I want you to remember the principles about weaving comprehension through all subjects, using verbal interactions, vocabulary enrichment, and projecting at broad background knowledge. Don't let the opportunities go by you. Tell stories in conversation, revel at the interesting words that are involved in different topics, and also revel at the ones used by your students. In case you wondered, that expert is Daniel T. Willingham, and he's my husband, and he's a cognitive psychologist, and he writes books. Good luck, everyone. Have fun creating a strong reading comprehension culture at your school.